Hi, my name is Zac Cohen. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Trulioo. Very happy to be here today.
Hi, I'm Jas Randhawa. I am the compliance officer for Stripe.
All right. Well, thanks for being here with us today, Jas. Let's get going with the presentation. A very new environment today where digital first is becoming digital only. And it's significant for all of us in financial services because the online interactions that we've experienced in the past are really moving from a convenience base to critical service base. And what that means is digital first is becoming digital only. Organizations that had digital offerings are now forced to go into a scenario where they must provide all of their services through that single vehicle, whereas before there was choice. And what we're seeing because of that is almost 3 years of innovation forced into 3 months. And the positive and negatives of both of those realities are amplified. Organizations that are doing it well are going to succeed. Organizations that are struggling are going to be amplified in that struggle. And the competition to choose services will be even fiercer. That's going to continue long after we're feeling the current environment, and these changes will persist. Jas, what have you seen in your early observations of the reality today?
So Zach, very specifically for Stripe, I have to say that for the last about decade, we've worked with this whole principle that we want to change and we want to increase the GDP of the internet. And when this whole pandemic hit, it was a little bit of a bittersweet reaction for us. We had to literally go back and throw the entire kitchen sink at this problem. The interesting aspects that I've noticed from my vantage point here have been businesses that have reacted quickly to this whole pandemic have I wouldn't say they've emerged victorious, but they've really emerged ahead of the curve. However, organizations which have taken a longer time to react to this whole situation and address the needs of the customers, you do feel them lagging behind, or you feel the pain with their users, which I feel is going to be a little bit of a new norm. Industries which are going to move ahead with this change and with this new normal, I personally believe are going to turn out on the positive end of the spectrum.
Astute observation. How do we then take that and rethink the landscape overall? Right? So there are a few areas that we think are important. First of all is the customer segmentation changes. We have now new demographics, new users, previously that might have been uninterested or not motivated to take a digital journey. They are now being pushed into this atmosphere. And so we need to be able to think about how that's going to impact our service delivery to service those new individuals and take advantage of that scenario. We're also going to see AML KYC changes and fraud prevention threats. With the new volume, with the new activity online, screening those users is not going to be a static case anymore where we deployed our service and our workflows for a single demographic or a single use case. There needs to be a real evaluation of that risk-based approach to address the differences of these new individuals that are starting to use online services at a higher frequency, but that clearly will have a different risk approach or screening that might make it easier or sometimes more challenging to onboard them. Jas, you had some interesting fraud prevention insight as well.
So we've actually been working very closely with a lot of the law enforcement society that we closely work with, and a bunch of our peers in this space. In the early days, we saw this spike in newer typologies that emerged, on the back of the new age of digitization that we've just experienced in the last couple of months. Things from merchants trying to sell fraudulent, PPE materials, non-delivery of some of these goods with an exponential increase in, things like elderly fraud. These are very much prevalent. So we are trying to stand up, a pretty solid surveillance structure to make sure we have our eyes and ears close to the ground to make sure we are able to mitigate some of these risks that are coming on the back of this new change. Interestingly enough, we do feel that, as you rightly mentioned, compliance and risk has always had this view of looking at business from a segment perspective or from a risk-based approach. I just feel it's going to be a lot more dynamic going forward. Even within a segment, you'll just have different lenses that you'll have to use to make sure the same measure is being applied, not across the whole segment, but then there are sub-measures being applied to different parts of the risk within the segment.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what's core and fundamental to that whole approach and evaluation? It's really the account creation and identity verification piece. And I think that what's interesting is as our focus on these new segments, it's really expanding identity verification from a regulatory obligation and a compliance use case to building trust online. And we can leverage these same types of identity verification tools to establish that trust, which really becomes critical to accepting and onboarding these new populations. Today, 90% of respondents believe that the financial institution is responsible for reducing cybercrime through whatever identity verification tools are necessary. So the approach has to be a required one and thought about so that we can adapt that without having to rebuild our entire systems or really ruining the customer experience. Jas, why don't you tell us how Stripe has come around and taken this approach firsthand?
Sure. Happy to dive a little bit deeper into, I'm going to talk a little bit specifically about the onboarding challenges and some successes that we've had. And I have to talk about when this pandemic struck, we didn't know how this was going to pan out. The only one thing that we were very sure about was that what worked in 2019 is not something that's going to work for us in 2020 for sure. Not just for us, but even for other businesses. The larger question was, what are we really solving for? And are we going to be able to at least future-proof ourselves for the next couple of years or until another pandemic hits that we are not aware of? So this was, in our perspective, this was a socioeconomic paradigm that we had to kind of put our finger on and really assess, what the impact would be. Our first reaction almost immediately was to go back and brace for impact and really assess how is Stripe exposed, to this whole situation from a fraud perspective, from a credit risk perspective. We do serve merchants in the hospitality and the travel industry. What does that mean for us? And we didn't really know, in the longer term how this was going to pan out. So getting a sense of reality in terms of where we stand today was the first thing that we had to do. Almost immediately on the back of it, we were seeing, a spike in newer fraud typologies, businesses folding, law enforcement outreach requests, where we were seeing even money laundering activity happening. The stock markets were going up and down, so it's hard. It wasn't necessarily, in my opinion, a recession in any way or form, but the idea was that there were also investment opportunities out there. You were seeing, ICOs crop up. How do you make sure you're not exposing ourselves to bad actors? The third one, which was the most interesting one, was we were seeing this flurry of potential customers who were sitting on the fringes and the sidelines of thinking of going digital, and they hadn't yet. And all of a sudden, they weren't left with a choice. They had to be digital. They had to come on our bandwagon. And then we had our existing large platform users who wanted more services. They wanted to expand their relationship and the portfolio with Stripe. And we had to go back and address their needs. So I think across these three spectrums, one of the common themes was onboarding for us. And we knew that that's one thing that we have to solve for. The one thing that we did differently was instead of solving for this problem in different silos with compliance and risk sitting in their own Zoom room, and business sitting in their own. We did try to get both of them together, and the best brains in the company, we were able to get them together to really think about what are those micro segments, how do we make sure we can onboard users at the same time, be comfortable in protecting the company and making sure we're only onboarding good actors. How do we build some compliance gating controls? How do we build some downstream compensating controls like transaction monitoring to make sure we are watching these merchants very closely? So that turned out, I wouldn't say it's it's a success. We still are seeing a lot of these changes unfurl, but we do feel confident. I can speak from my perspective, being a compliance officer. I feel good about the fact where I'm sitting, and I'm seeing this influx of new users and the existing ones. I feel kind of good about it. So my advice and takeaway to our friends out here would be: you got to make sure you are being creative and you're solving for problems. Get the right people, that's business and compliance, in the same room. You got to talk. Just don't try to solve this problem individually in your silos. The second one is technology is your friend. Make sure you talk to your vendors. Make sure you talk to your engineers. Make sure you're able to conceive the ideas that business and compliance has into technical solutions, and you're able to get ahead of the curve. And lastly, I would say, in my opinion, this is always a cyclic process. You got to see a problem, you got to react to it, you've got to innovate, and then you got to repeat the whole process again. Take the learnings out and feed that back into your models, but make sure you're changing with the new need. Talk to your peers, talk to law enforcement, talk to people around you who can advise you. I think that takes you a long, long way.
Excellent. And let's take a look at where a lot of those learnings were gleaned from. We recently undertook a large research activity in the UK and the US exploring consumer attitudes. And a lot of these areas are quite interesting and insightful. We found that 77% of new users were saying that initial experience makes or breaks the relationship. And today, still almost 60% are not satisfied with it. Moreover, individuals have a higher trust with organizations that use real-time identity verification and communicate that. It's critically important. And a huge change that we've noticed as well is several years back, we found convenience and speed was everything around the user experience. Today, we're actually seeing consumers request and actually appreciate a level of friction as long as it is security driven towards the account creation process. So what are our takeaways overall in terms of our understandings here, and how can we balance these different aspects? The first and foremost is thinking about identity verification as a network. We need to take a holistic and layered approach to identity verification to manage the increased volume of traffic that we're seeing today and the new threats. And that really means layering approaches and taking an internal hub that can connect to the right tool when you need it for the use case with that specific risk-based approach. And so you need to evaluate your tools holistically and try to achieve a technology partner that can bring that layered approach to you. As Jas mentioned, we need internal alignment and group strategic planning. No longer are the days when we can take a technological or digital onboarding solution without the risk and compliance teams there from the get-go. Also, very important to understand that not all tech is built the same. It's important to provide and perform risk and InfoSec reviews of your technology partners early on, because if they're processing critical data, we need to make sure that they have the maturity to handle these new and complex cases. And they also need to have a flexibility built in so we can solve not only today's issues, but tomorrow's as well. And lastly, in closing, this is an opportunity for incentive alignment. We've had struggles in the past around digital transformation, but with everything we've covered here today, the reality is it's a must-have digital onboarding experience. It's a must-have digital deployment. And this is a gross opportunity to have everything from the executive level throughout the organization align around that incentive to create a wholesome, effective, and efficient solution, taking into account everything we know today. Well, really appreciate everyone joining us today. Thank you, Jas, for your insights on Stripe and how we approach that situation. And I hope everyone enjoys the conference virtually here.
And a very good morning, a very early good morning to you, Zac. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you very much.
I really enjoyed listening to you and Jas interacting during that presentation. It's always great to hear both about the technology, but what people have been doing in practice or what they've been experiencing during the pandemic period. So I have a few questions that have come through, and I'm wondering, this one seems remarkably suitable given my remarks. You talked about a lot of interesting concepts and feedback from the surveys. I wonder if you can talk about a quick deployment situation. And just to give people a bit of an illustration about what that might entail.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to. One that comes to mind is a very common scenario. We have, recently actually quite a large FinServ that was active primarily in the UK market, but they had plans to launch internationally with a more aggressive digital strategy. What that comes down to is running the executive team first and foremost through what similar organizations like themselves are doing in those markets to satisfy KYC, AML, and fraud prevention. We ran several POCs to determine the optimal performance levels, as well as which services we thought were most effective. In this particular case, it ended up being a variety of credit and government sources with a waterfall to a document verification in certain markets that had lower coverage in those more traditional sources. We ran through a legal agreement in just a few weeks, which we're known for getting quickly and doing well. And then we had the API running up in a live environment for launch quickly, and now they're active in more than 10 markets with us. So it follows a very similar trajectory in terms of sharing our market intelligence, understanding what the executives want as a final output, ensuring that the product market fit is there, and then launching and growing.
Sorry, I'm just taking myself off of mute. Apologies, Zac. All right, well, we have a second question as well. You talked about those risk and security issues that consumers have, and their particular concerns are quite valid, right? They want to be able to engage safely with the financial services. And, how do you achieve that balance? There was a recent survey done that said 4 out of 10 businesses would consider changing their bank because of the delayed experience they're having as part of the onboarding process, and even additional verification delays when they have been trying to access the government assistance programs on offer. So how do we achieve that efficiency and security balance?
Asking those types of questions to consumers is really, it's nuanced, and it's not a zero-sum game. That's, I think, the most critical element. Security doesn't mean a lack of speed. It means a thoughtful process that is communicated as much to the customer. And so when we talk about intentional friction, it is just much about that customer experience with intentional friction that highlights security and certain protocols, but that also values speed. So it's not a lopsided one lever over the other. It's a blend of both that create an optimal outcome, both security, both fraud prevention, but also easy onboarding and a good customer and user experience that we've grown accustomed to and require. Throughout all of that, the technology you use is the key. There doesn't have to be a one or another. You find those that can blend them both well and service your particular need for that specific user group better. Different demographics will react differently. So you need to communicate that much. You need to choose a versatile workflow for each. I think that folks that are more used to this experience have certain expectations. Folks that are new to it want to see something else as well. So it is a nuanced world, but the key is to balance and not to overcompensate one versus the other.
Okay. Yeah, we have an interesting question from participants who may actually be the financial institutions who want to access eKYC technology. We talked a little bit in your presentation with Jas about risk and security assessments and also determining just how flexible your provider is. Can you maybe help some of the people listening with a couple of examples about what might be good questions institutions should be asking if they're considering taking on the adoption of eKYC technology?
Yeah, thank you. For me in this industry, the first question you always need to ask is how do they handle your PII, the personal information that you transfer to them? You need to read the T's and C's contract carefully. You need to ask those questions and really uncover what is happening in the background. It's very easy to say something is anonymized. You really need to look into what is happening. Do they retain it? Why? Who is it shared with? These are very standard questions now with GDPR and other regulations that occur more frequently in Europe and the US and other markets. But you really need to dig in and ask and find out how it's handled. I think the other thing in terms of the maturity, the vendor that you're dealing with, we all love a good long due diligence questionnaire, right? But it is key to measuring and determining maturity. You start with their policy documentation. I know it sounds a little labor intensive, but you want to understand how they present themselves from an InfoSec perspective. How do they model their network diagrams? How do they describe their software development lifecycle? These are very important aspects of dealing with organizations that have taken the time to put the work in to demonstrate that level of maturity. And I think when it comes also around the flexibility as a last point, you really need to dive in and test each service individually that you're considering purchasing. Saying you have global coverage, saying you have this or that, you really get a good read into it with testing. And we encourage all of our customers to test so that they understand exactly what the production live experience is going to look like.
Excellent. Well, we have a couple of minutes left. And with that time, I'm going to ask my own question, Zac. You're doing some pretty exciting stuff over at Trulioo. What's coming up? What can we look forward to next?
Yeah, well, we're focused in two big areas. And that is financial inclusion. It's very important to us. And so we're taking those efforts to expand which markets we serve and getting to that, more developing markets and then sort of extending that coverage to new countries and new services that weren't available before. And then, frankly, we have a very big focus on expanding the methodology through which you can identify an individual or a business securely. I know for a lot of our attendees today, how you verify legal entities is very important. And we've expanded our tool set and our capabilities in that dramatically over the last few months, and we're going to continue doing that, as well as the different layers of how you can identify individuals. So, we walk through more traditional methods, we walk through documents, we walk through a bank account login, we walk through, mobile carrier information. And so, that's where we're headed, really to expand the depth to provide that information back and entering new markets that weren't available before so that organizations that want to pursue international and global coverage can do so very easily with us.
Excellent. Well, Zac, it's been an absolute pleasure. Most of you may not be aware, Zac has stayed up in order to participate because he's way over on the other side of the Canadian continent in British Columbia. So thank you again, Zac.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure, and I appreciate everyone attending and taking a look and spending some time with us today.
Great. Well, we're about to head off to a break for those who are participating right now. And can I just say, if you've set up a meeting with one of our sponsors, such as Trulioo, please follow up with your meeting. And can I again, please encourage you? So many financial institutions I speak to say, I never get a chance to actually see what the technology does or speak to somebody who is working in the RegTech field. This is your day. Arrange those meetings, ask all the silly questions that you think you wouldn't dare ask in a larger venue. This is your chance to really have a one-on-one dialogue with some of these providers, and you find them on the landing page. And if you've managed to get a little bit lost, just go to the top and click the Transform Finance logo, and it'll bring you back to the beginning. So please, this is a great opportunity to do so and keep networking. Thank you for some of your messages. I'll be bouncing back and reply to some of you as well. So with that, please enjoy your break, make yourselves a coffee, stretch your legs, and we'll see you back very shortly at 11:35. Thanks very much.